Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Listen, glad to have you here on this Sunday, the 26th of July, 2020. Now, Bitcoin is going to, what's the world going to be like when Bitcoin hits $1 million? I'm going to try to explain it. I'm going to try to narrow it down when I think that's going to actually happen now. See, as we're moving into this crisis, things are becoming clearer to me, what's going on. And what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do is we're going to listen to a clip by Ray Dalio. Now, Ray Dalio has said that cash is trash. And there's reasoning behind, a lot of reasoning and common sense behind what he's saying. The central banks now are caught in a trap. If they stop printing, and actually they don't print, they just push a key on a computer, and they enter in how many digits of money units that they want to create, and they push enter, and it pops into existence. If they stop all that, the central banks, the system is going to completely disintegrate. There's no other way of putting it. It's going to completely disintegrate. And if they keep going with this, and it takes ever-increasing amounts that they have to keep entering into the computer. If they keep going with this, we're going to eventually head into a hyperinflation. The question is when are we going to head into a hyperinflation? Now, I'm going to let you listen to what Ray Dalio has to say. And what he's talking about here, he's talking about the central bank's willingness to keep printing money or keep creating money in order to keep the system not just afloat, but to keep themselves from being held responsible for the system crashing. Basically, picture in your mind's eye thousands of people, as far as the eye can see, with farm implements in their hands and torches, and they're angry. Millions of them. Coming after the Fed. They know this. They know that if they don't keep this system supported and keep it running, that they're going to lose power. Their power base will disappear. This is what supports them, what's kept them going all this time, is a power base that's been created for them over a period of like 6,000 years. It started out with kings. And now the elected officials are similar to like the kings used to be in the king's court. They used to have a court where there was all these officials and stuff, and it was all pomp and pageantry, and the king would come down and sit in his chair, and he'd hold up his scepter, and he'd bring in his court, and the court would come and kneel, and all this stuff has been going on for thousands of years. And now the modern day political structure are these same rulers, sitting in their ivory tower, ruling the people. The last thing they want is the people to start actually starving or whatever, and the people to rebel and be a popular uprising amongst all the people on earth. And we see seeds of this in things that have happened in quite recent history, like in France. I point to that as kind of an example. And these uprisings can come from nowhere. Just one person does something and other people start to follow, and the next thing you know, there's thousands of people involved in it. Whatever it is, they can name it whatever they want to name it. A name can spring out of nowhere. Like the jackets or vests that they kept in their cars in France. A name can spring out of nowhere. And these movements, if the conditions are right, these movements have come from nowhere. And so the banks are in a position now where they have to keep the system going. They don't want it to go into hyperinflation, but at the same time they don't want it to deflate. They can't let it deflate, and they know if they keep going, it's going to go into hyperinflation because they're destroying the purchasing power of the fiat currencies. But they're trapped. So what has Ray Dalio got to say? For the next 15 seconds, let's listen.
But what are the market limits, or how does that become manifest? I can describe that. But what's their willingness to go? Their willingness to go is enough to keep order which means acceptable economic conditions.
Maybe this is why Ray Dalio says that cash is trash, you know? Okay, so what's going on with this situation right now? Well, we have two things coming down the pike that the central bank's very scared of, and both of them they cannot control. Really, they don't have extensively, they don't really have, money creation is not a control over these two things. One is the virus, which is sweeping the world. And the other thing is hyperinflation. They can't control it because if they dump money on hyperinflation, they just make it worse. So they don't want to go there. They don't want to get hyperinflation started. So how do you control hyperinflation? Well, back in the 1970s, in the United States of America, they started to descend toward hyperinflation. And everybody thought that they were going to go into a hyperinflation. But Paul Volcker, which was the Fed chairman at the time, raised interest rates up to amazingly high values to crush inflation. And this is a central bank's tool because when interest rates go up, people stop borrowing money, you know, and the economy starts to cool down. And this is what causes hyperinflation, is not an economy that's cooling down, but an economy that's heating up. Right now, we got an economy that's cool and cooling down. And in that kind of an economy, they can dump money into the situation, and it won't turn into a hyperinflation. So this is actually working to the Fed's advantage right now, the fact that there's so many people out of work. This is deflationary. It's not hyperinflationary. But on the other side of this coin, when the virus starts to go away, what happens then? The economies can start heating up rather quickly at that point in time. And then we're moving into the conditions toward hyperinflation. Hyperinflation ultimately is the great destroyer. And this is what's really going to drive the Bitcoin price up high, is if the world goes into a hyperinflation, because they will turn to any alternative assets outside the fiat currencies. This is just fact, you know. And this is a central bank's worst nightmare. But this is what we're going to be leading toward in the coming period. What we got to do is first we got to get through this deflationary period. But now during this deflationary period, the Fed has a greater amount of control. And so it's actually in their best interest the longer that they can keep this deflationary period going. And this is why the Fed is actually hauling their horns in back a little bit and not producing quite as much stimulus as they were. They produced enough stimulus early on in this crisis. In March, they produced $2.2 trillion worth of stimulus. And now they've hauled back and they're talking about maybe $1 trillion, or $1.5 trillion. Just enough to keep the economy staggering along. They do not want, this is the Fed's trapped right now, they do not want the economy to descend into a deflationary funk to the point where the people have a popular uprising. But they're treading on very thin ice with this, and a very dangerous game indeed that they're playing, because if they don't give enough stimulus, that we'll see a popular uprising. And if they give too much stimulus, we'll see the beginnings of hyperinflation. And so the Fed is kind of caught in the middle here. What did they do? They are scared. They're scared right now. I can tell you, the ones who are really in charge of the Fed right now are really, really scared about what's going on. And they do not have a lot to control this situation with, because they have these two big forces, two monstrous forces working simultaneously. The disease and hyperinflation. And it very much limits them. What's happening is because they can't raise interest rates anymore either, and they're not even talking about it anymore. They can't control, that's one of their control mechanisms to cool the economy down. They don't have that anymore. The only thing that's cooling the economy down for them now is this virus. It's helping the Fed manage the economy. But now, what about when the virus starts to disappear and people quit being frightened anymore and everything, and we're at our lowest peak, say 6 months or a year from now? the virus starts to disappear. We're at our lowest ebb. Most people are out of work. That's if we can hold it together and not have a popular uprising. Okay, so we're at our lowest ebb. Of course, when you're at your lowest ebb and the virus starts to disappear, people are going to start to go out to eat. People are going to start to fly again. People are going to start to travel again. People are going to start to buy things again. And they're going to want to make up for lost time. New jobs will be created. Lots of them. Unemployment will start to drop again. And naturally, the banks out there that have been fed by the Fed, been fed money by the Fed during this crisis, they've been holding that money back as liquidity within the banking system. They'll now see the opportunity to start lending money out to ventures that want to start. Maybe a person wants to start a new restaurant or whatever. So the economy will start to heat back up again. The velocity of money will start to heat back up again. And then what does the Fed do at that point? Because they can't raise interest rates any longer. And the reason why is because they will not be able to service the debt. And by that time, with these exorbitantly large deficits every year, which are adding a tremendous burden more to the debt, they can't even go over 1% interest rate. And so money starts to be lent out. The economy will start to overheat. That's when we're going to see the inflation, and that's when we're going to see gold and silver and cryptocurrencies really take off. But in this environment that we're in right now, looking at it from a short-term perspective, gold and silver right now are up a little bit. They're flirting with a little bit high territory right now, considering the economic deflationary pressures that are in the system. But this is a little bump up because of all the money that was created back in March, the $2.2 trillion, which is starting to evaporate now. And so what we're looking at is possibly a buying opportunity coming up for cryptocurrency, gold and silver, all three. But what that's going to lead to ultimately is when the economy starts to heat back up again, the inflation's starting to really tick up. The inflation monster is really going to come out. Because China is, as an economic powerhouse, as being able to produce goods for the world, has been, let's just put it this way, muted to a certain degree. And, there's going to be an awful lot of empty shelves and things you might need. You might need a sprocket or whatever that comes from China. And the guy goes in the back of his room and he says, oh, we're all out of those sprockets. And by the way, the factory closed in China. Well, there'll be a new guy over here in America that'll open up a factory making sprockets. He'll borrow from the bank. So everything's going to start to heat back up again, but it's going to start to move toward inflation. And once inflation actually starts to run away, confidence starts to be lost amongst savers around. And because the economy's starting to perk back up again, savers start to withdraw their money from the bank and they start to spend again. Because they say to themselves, hey, I'm going to buy that car this year. And the reason why is the virus is over. That was ended a year ago. And my money is starting to lose value really fast. And I'm not going to keep it in the bank. And this actually increases the speed and velocity money's moving at. Things like that happening unanimously. And that's when we start to move toward inflation. And it's ultimately that high inflation rates, like we had in the 1970s, that they can't control this time. There's no Paul Volcker out there anytime now that has the will to actually raise interest rates that high to control inflation. This is the real hyperinflation coming. So when's Bitcoin going to hit the big time? It's when this inflation comes, when the virus disappears. That's when Bitcoin is really going to come into its own. Until then, what we're going to do is we're going to have to suffer through these deflationary pressures that are in the system that are going to continue, and this is going to help the Fed get through this situation until the virus is gone. But heaven help us all. once the virus and the economy starts to pick back up after the virus is gone. Heaven help us all, because we're heading toward the great destroyer, and that is the hyperinflation that the Fed can't fight, and it's going to be a worse tragedy than the virus itself, because to take and have to have all of the fiat currencies go down in flames and slowly become worthless at a certain point in that movement, as the fiat currencies are becoming worthless, at a certain point everybody starts to see it, and everybody wants to get out at once, and that's when that's when the chaos comes, because that's when the value of them really start to plummet, when everybody's trying to get out of them. And I know this is a bit hard for people to actually see this coming, because for so many years we've talked hyperinflation. But what we didn't realize is the central banks, in dumping and printing all this money, have been printing it into a deflationary cycle. And the deflation's been sucking all the liquidity up. And people have been saving it. See, the mentality of people during a deflationary cycle is to save. So when they get all this extra money, $1,200 checks from the government and everything else, they stash it away someplace. They don't go out and spend it on things that they need. They'll stash it. People will stash the money because they're scared. They want to save their money for a rainy day because they're scared of what's going to happen to them. They see the deflation out there, and they see the system deflating, and they're like, hey, you know what? Save your money right now. You might need it. It's that mentality. But when the virus ends and we start to move toward the system warming back up again, and jobs are being created, and there's good numbers coming in and everything else, and everything looks rosy, that's when people start to spend again. These are cycles. Follow these cycles if you want to really know what's going to happen. The virus is one of the big keys to understanding the timing of everything that's going to happen in this situation. And we can see this virus progression from one stage to another, starting with the first wave, and then we're moving into the second wave, and then later they're creating vaccines, and we can see the progression of it as it moves through. It's not going to be here forever. It's one of those things that moves over like a storm, and then it drifts back out to sea again. You know, especially if they get a working vaccine. And I mean, what do you guys really sitting there thinking? What do you think the odds of them actually getting a true good working vaccine are? We got hundreds of companies around the world all trying to get their vaccines in first. It would be like a race with 1,000 cars heading toward the finish line, and you know somebody's going to cross that finish line because they're all fighting for it. Well, that's the way with these vaccines. We got like 100 different companies out there, you know, with new ideas and trying new things. Like here in Canada, they're trying to make a plant-based vaccine, first time ever, because they'll be able to mass produce it quick. Other than the old traditional type where they think they used to use eggs. Plants is a little bit different, but you know, these new ideas, thinking out of the box. First thing you know, somebody's going to have a workable vaccine in some country, because they're all getting close. They go through stages of development, and they're getting into the later stages in a dozen different vaccines. Here it comes. Vaccine comes. Virus starts to disappear. The economy starts to heat back up again. It might not be that long. It might only be the spring. I'm thinking to myself, probably the next spring. Go through this winter, next spring. And the widespread uses of vaccines starts to come out. And the next thing you know, the economy starts to pick up because people aren't scared anymore. An awful lot of this is a confidence game. And right now, people are not confident. They're saving their money so they can dump as much money out there as they want. The Fed can. It just gets absorbed into the system. But that's not the way it is once things start to turn around. There's $20 trillion in savers' bank accounts across the United States. Let that sink in for a minute. $20 trillion. We got the FDIC out there, And I think they got like 100 billion or something. They got some small amount compared to the amount that's on deposit. It's like nothing compared to the amount that's on deposit in the United States. Can you imagine if all that money starts to actually come out of those bank accounts and starts to chase after goods and services? We've already created enough money, by the way, for a hyperinflation. Dr. Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitts have discovered some over $20 trillion that they created off the books. And how many more accounts like that have they created we don't know anything about? Anyway, listen, guys. Thank you for listening to my show. Bitcoin is a new invention. It didn't start that long ago. How long did it take gold to actually become an accepted means of payment? Probably took a long time. I wasn't there because it happened so long ago, way back probably BC, sometime BC. You know? I can't, nobody much knows how long it took gold to become an accepted means around the world of exchange. But Bitcoin has only been around since 2009, and I think it's progressed one heck of a long way toward that goal of becoming an accepted means of exchange. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you guys in the next show. Bye-bye.